Welcome back to Hilaal Live. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'd like to say Jazakallah to my co-host for these 10 days, Khawa Solomon. She has done a splendid job taking over that first hour. Now, of course, Qurbani will be performed tomorrow, and it is a ritual that was, of course, first started with Hazrat Ibrahim alayhi salam, and it has filtered down from generation to generation, a duty us as Muslims need to perform during Eid ul-Adha. But there's also many other aspects that come with regards to it. And that is, of course, none other than the caring of the animal. So I'd like to bring in Dr. Hein Nel, who is the meat safety advisor for the National Independent Halaal Trust. Dr. Nel, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening, and to your viewers as well.
Okay, Dr. Nel, I think let's get first with the nitty-gritties with regards to how the animals first get to its destination. The regulation of transporting live animals, what are they?
Well, in South Africa, really, regulation is only stated in the Meat Safety Act, which pertains to the slaughter of animals at abattoirs. So apart from that, there are various animal welfare codes that gets published by the different bodies that regulate the meat industry as such, but these are not real regulations that has passed through government. The red meat regulations really contains the only information regarding the transport of animals.
Dr. Nel, how should live animals be kept at the residence of one who wants to sacrifice it? Because we know obviously there's a lot of regulations that come with regards to that. So maybe can you explain the viewers in terms of that?
Yeah, well, basically, if we need to summarize how you should handle and keep animals and treat animals, I think we always refer to the 5 freedoms. And if I can quickly name them, that would be the freedom from hunger and thirst, the freedom from discomfort, and the freedom from pain, injury, and disease. Then, of course, we need to let animals express normal behavior. So anything that prohibits them from expressing normal behavior obviously is considered poor welfare. And then the last one is they must be free from fear and distress.
Dr. Nel, what food should be given to the animals? Because, I mean, we've got a classic case of course, the seller who sells the animal to the buyer, who of course is going to be performing the slaughtering. So what food should be given in terms of making sure that on the day of the slaughtering, or as we would say, Qurbani, that you have an animal, you have the animal that you paid for, but most importantly, that it's nourished well?
Yes, well nourished. Look, if you're going to animal feed, it makes sense if you think about it. Changing the food at number 99 is not a good practice. So I would advise your members to find out what type of food the animal consumed prior to the purchase. Because as you would know, changing food, let's say you are dealing with a feedlot animal and now all of a sudden you need to feed it roughage like a free-range animal. Changing the food will not be beneficial to the animal. So what we try and do is, there are lots of diets that we give to animals, but it differs. High carbohydrate diets for feedlot animals, preferably you should keep to that. High roughage diets as in free-range animals, they will not act well if you suddenly change their feed to a high carbohydrate diet. So try and find out what the animal was consuming before you purchased it. If it was a free-ranging grazing animal, then I would say grass-fed is the best way to go.
Dr. Nel, animals, just like humans, will have stress. Some would say maybe us humans stress even much more. But of course, the animal would feel stressed because it's in a situation where, it's surrounded by so many of its fellow kind, and of course surrounded by human beings. So in order to make it easy for the animal, what should be avoided to make sure that no stress is given to that animal?
Yes, that is a simple question with a lot of answers, but let me quickly simplify it and give you a couple of answers that would maybe serve as good pointers to your members or to the animal owner. there are lots of things that distract animals. They're sentient beings, so they've got the ability to feel emotion like we do in terms of fear, distress. You can actually see an animal when it's satisfied or happy. They have a tendency to show different behavioral patterns to when they experience pain, discomfort. All of these freedoms that I've just explained to you at the beginning of this interview. Obviously, we need to take into account that some animals tend to have different behavioral patterns. Small ruminants, for instance, they've got a very strong drive to flock together. If you are separating sheep or goats from each other, keeping them apart, you're actually causing a lot of stress. It's much better to keep them together for the duration of the stay, because in that regard, you're going to minimize the stress. And of course, as we will maybe see after slaughter, stress does have a very, very real negative effect on the quality of meat as well, not only in the terms of welfare, because welfare is very important, but there are different reasons as to why welfare is important. If we quickly run through the 5 freedoms, freedom of hunger and thirst, obviously we've already dealt with that. The water should always be available. That's non-negotiable. Animals need to drink water when and where they like to, because obviously water is very important, but then also hunger. Luckily for us, ruminants tend to be more resistant to going without food for maybe 24 to 48 hours, because they're ruminants. They don't have the same physiology as humans. They don't need to eat every 6 or 7 hours. They can actually go for longer. That does not mean that you need to keep them away from food. They should have free access to food. Discomfort, it's winter time now. We can't keep them in the snow and the rain if they're not used to it. Shelter is very important for them. Pain, injury, and disease. Obviously, if an animal is diseased or there's an injury, it's considered poor welfare practice to just keep them for longer than they need to be kept, rather than perform an emergency slaughter or consult a veterinarian or do something to ease the pain. And as I've already said, flocking together, don't try and tie them one apart from each other. That will really stress them. And of course, if you keep them free in distress, the meat quality is good.
Dr. Nel, I want to stay on the word stress, because the quality of meat has an effect, obviously, on, the quality of the animal that is being slaughtered. So, what effect does stress have on the quality of meat which will eventually be consumed?
Sure. The thing is, when you stress an animal prior to slaughter, there's a lot of stress hormones being released into the system. The net effect of all of this is that really the pH of the meat after slaughter does not fall to adequate levels. So if you stress an animal prior to slaughter, the meat tends to be tough afterwards. And of course, what goes hand in hand with that is if you've got tough meat with poor pH levels, your shelf life is compromised, severely compromised sometimes. So instead of the carcass keeping for a week or longer under chilled conditions, it may go off even after 48 hours, and then it's not fit for human consumption anymore. So there's a very real detrimental effect on the quality of the carcass if you stress an animal prior to slaughter.
Dr. Nel, after slaughter, what steps should be taken to protect the quality of the carcass?
There's a lot of factors that contribute to the quality of the carcass. I think one of the important ones is the slaughter technique itself. So during the slaughter, after the killing of the animal, obviously it's inevitable that we kill animals for meat consumption. But the way in which you dress the carcass, that includes the removal of the skin, as well as removal of the innards, the intestinal tract, which is carrying loads of bacteria for that matter. The way that you dress a carcass is very important. So hygienic dressing and slaughter technique really important to avoid cross-contamination of the edible parts of the carcass. And then, of course, the one thing that's really important is proper thermal control. We need to keep meat cold to a level that inhibits bacterial growth. And that lengthens the shelf life. So meat just keeps much better if it's properly chilled after slaughter. We keep carcasses, if you look at the red meat regulations, carcasses typically needs to be kept at 7 degrees or colder. So typically we're not freezing it if it's fresh meat, but between -1 degree Celsius and 7 degrees Celsius, that will ensure proper shelf life of your product.
Dr. Hein Nel, we'd like to say thank you so much for joining us. Much appreciated.
It's a pleasure.
That's Dr. Hein Nel. He's a meat and animal safety advisor for the National Independent Halaal Trust, just giving us steps with regards to animal welfare ahead of the Qurbani, which will be performed tomorrow. After the break, I will be catching up with Yusuf Abramji from Makkatul Mukarramah, as he'll be giving us an update with regards to today's proceedings which happened at Muzdalifah and of course the Tawaf around the Kaaba. Do stay tuned.